General Milley, you offered all of the concerning intelligence, and I'm going to request that you provide it to us. I would like you to provide us the relevant intelligence information that you based your belief that China was going to believe that there was an imminent attack. I also want your request for declassification of the approval that you released that information that China believed so, including your request for declassification of your conversation that you had with General Lee and any approvals. I want a transcript of your call with General Lee, and I also want any readouts, memorandums, notice of calls, or outcomes. Now, you chose to talk to reporters instead of us, and that's great. It's of great concern. No one in Congress knew that one of two of the major nuclear powers thought that they were perhaps being threatened for attack. Now, Mr. Secretary, that turns my questions to you then. Mr. Secretary, if you learn that Russia or China believes that they may be subject to an attack by the United States, as a member of the President's cabinet, do you believe that information should be handled at the cabinet level and with the President, with the National Security Advisor, the Secretary of Defense? Do you believe the chair and ranking member of Intel and the House Armed Services Committee and Foreign Affairs Committee need to know these? Or do you believe that a belief of the possibility of an attack by the United States against Russia and China is appropriately handled by the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff in a phone call with his counterpart with one of those nations? Please tell me that you believe it elevates to the level that you would elevate that to the cabinet and to Congress and not just have it be subsequently told to us all by newspaper articles in the Washington Post and the New York Times, as General Milley chose to do.
Thank you, sir. Obviously, we would want to follow standard protocol, and what you described is what I would the type of actions that I would consider taking. But General Milley, as what I heard him say yesterday, and I think again today, is that his chain of command, the Secretary of Defense at the time, was aware of the actions, and so
after what he said yesterday is after.
I'm sorry.
No, that's not correct. What I said yesterday, today.
If I could hold on just a second, everybody. Time has expired. Mr. Turner is very clever. He made a very direct attack as his time was expiring. I'm going to violate the rules here a little bit and let Chairman Milley respond to that direct attack, hopefully briefly, and then we'll move on to the next witness.
With respect to the intelligence, I have it right here. I'll be happy to share it with you.
Great.
I guarantee that that intelligence was disseminated in the President's PDB, the Vice President, the DNI, Director of CIA, the Secretary of Defense, the Assistant to the President for National Security Affairs, and others. That was significant, and there was a lot of it. It wasn't just a singular report. There was a lot. I'll be happy to share that with you and go over with you line by line. And it was significant, and it was concerning to the point where Secretary of Defense Esper, Admiral Davidson, and myself, along with others, had conversations about it. And I was directed by then Secretary of Defense Esper. First, he directed his Assistant Secretary of Defense for Asia-Pacific Affairs to make calls, and then me. Same thing. This is all done with oversight, and I tried to lay that out in the memoranda. I tried to lay it out in a timeline in an unclassified way that you can use it with your constituents.
And we're going to, I'm sorry, we're going to have to leave it at that.
I'll be happy to take it up at a later date, your convenience.
Mr. Courtney is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to the witnesses for your service and testimony today. One comment, Mr. Chairman, before questions. Over the last month, including yesterday's Senate hearing, we heard a lot of, in my opinion, over-the-top claims that the U.S. had lost all credibility with its allies in the wake of the withdrawal from Afghanistan. Last week, Mr. Chairman, we saw firsthand in Washington how mistaken that claim was. On Wednesday last week, I attended a ceremony over in the Senate where the Australian Prime Minister, Scott Morrison, said that Australia was proud to go into Afghanistan together and leave together, degrading al-Qaeda and preventing a major terrorist attack, and in very heartfelt terms, thanked the United States, particularly the 11 Marines, 1 Navy corpsman, and 1 soldier who perished while safely evacuating 4,100 Australians from Kabul. Boris Johnson, last week, who was also in town when asked about the U.S. standing post-withdrawal, said, "What I said to Joe Biden is how grateful I am for the amazing work of the U.S. military in helping us extricate in 2 weeks 15,000 British nationals from Kabul to whom we owe debts of honor and gratitude. The U.S. military were heroic." Of course, they were in town to enthusiastically endorse AUKUS, the new defense agreement in the Pacific, which, as Politico reported, despite all the hand-wringing over the last couple weeks, was a powerful reminder that an American security guarantee with our allies still reigns supreme, and in the stroke of a pen has reaffirmed our engagement and collaboration with allies in a region that the National Defense Strategy has identified as our #1 priority. Secretary Austin, I just want to follow up on the August 29th drone strike, and General McKenzie on the 17th again gave, I guess, a Central Command investigation report, which described it as a tragic mistake. You also that day announced that there was going to be a DOD follow-up investigation. Can you tell us what is the difference between what you described and what CENTCOM did, and when can we expect to see results from that, that investigation that you described?
Well, I directed a 3-star review of the incident, and certainly it'll take into account all of the things that General McKenzie and his team have done. But we'll look at the soup to nuts policy procedures, whether or not we followed our own practices, our outlined practices, and we'll certainly look at accountability as well. If somebody should be held accountable for something that they did that was outside of standard practice, then we'll take a look at that. So.
General McKenzie, you mentioned on the 17th that the department is exploring the possibility of ex gratia payments as compensation for the individuals who died in that strike. And again, that's a $3 million per year set aside that the United States military's operation has used over in the past. However, in 2020, despite 23 civilians that were killed, there was no payments made last year. Can you give us some feeling that that this agreement is sufficient to address this issue, which I think really is our country's responsibility?
Sir, I agree with you. I believe we have a significant responsibility here. And I know that even as we speak right now, Undersecretary of Defense for Policy is engaged in finding the best way to move forward on an appropriate ex gratia payment and whatever other measures may be contemplated in regard to that family. And I'll just leave it at that.
Thank you. And I just would reflect that certainly is a high volume concern in my district.
Sure.
General Milley, again, we first met in 2013 on a Codell. You were in Jalalabad, Afghanistan, and I think many of us had that same experience of seeing you in country there, and certainly your service is something that I think should be unquestioned in commitment to our nation. In your testimony, you talked again about the Doha Agreement, the conditions that were put into place for the Taliban to perform, and that only 1 out of the 8 actually had been complied with, even up through February. Nonetheless, 80% of the troops in the U.S. were drawn down from the date of the Doha Agreement to January 21st. Can you just talk about the non-compliance of the Taliban throughout 2020 and the predicament that I think this administration was left when it took office with just a fraction of the troop level that was there in February 2020?
We had almost 13,000 U.S. troops there in February 2020, and you got the numbers for inauguration. But the bottom line is reduction in violence, nationwide ceasefire, and a whole series of other.
I apologize, but the gentleman's time has expired.
I'll respond to the record on that. Thank you.
Mr. Lamburn is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We on this committee have repeatedly expressed our concern that the U.S. military does not have regional basing and cooperation agreements required for an effective over-the-horizon counterterrorism capability. In May, Mr. Helvey, in response to my questioning here, confirmed that this administration had not yet secured the necessary agreements with any of the governments in the region to establish these over-the-horizon capabilities. So, General McKenzie, has the administration, as of today, secured any necessary agreements with a neighboring country to provide the basing and overflight requirements needed to perform over-the-horizon counterterror operations in landlocked Afghanistan?
Representative, as of today, I have the ability to enter Afghanistan and to fly missions. It's a long haul in, but I have the ability to do that today.
But no, we don't have an agreement with a neighboring country. Is that true? Isn't that true?
Obviously, it's a neighboring country that's allowing us access, but we're not based in any neighboring country. That's correct, sir.
Okay. So we can safely assume that as of August 31st, we did not also have an agreement at that time in the past. Okay, thank you. General Milley, at the June 23rd hearing here, you testified to this committee that Bagram was not necessary tactically to the military's withdrawal plan. You dismissed my and other people's concerns about the military value of Bagram, and you seem to base that on an assessment that the Taliban at that point had not yet taken major districts. Yesterday, though, you told Senator Blackburn that one of the courses of action you provided the Commander-in-Chief was to keep Bagram Air Base open, which sounds different from what you told us in January 23rd. But for the record, was it your professional military opinion and advice that we should abandon Bagram Air Base? And if not, was this decision forced on you by the arbitrary troop cap of roughly 650?
Once the President's decision was made in mid-April, 14 April, and we had a change in mission to go to 0 and bring the troops down to a number that was only required to maintain an embassy. The Bagram decision was made at that point, because at that point there's no way you could defend both Bagram and HKIA. But one additional point. Most of the people that were required to be in a NEO were coming out of Kabul. And HKIA, as Scotty Miller, General Miller has already testified to, KIA was always going to be the center of gravity of any NEO. But we didn't have the forces available to do both.
Okay,
so
thank you. I'm going to ask General McKenzie a question. General McKenzie, had we kept control of Bagram, what forces or what options and capabilities would that have given U.S. forces during the withdrawal, had that been in play?
Well, in order to hold Bagram, I'd have needed to probably pushing 5,000 more troops on the ground. So that would have been a significant decision to hold Bagram. And we were under the direction to go to 0. So it would have required a basic policy directive, change the plan. If you're going to go to 0 and you're going to keep enough forces to hold your embassy in the airfield, it is incompatible to hold any other base anywhere in the country. So that would be a policy decision to go out and hold Bagram under that case. Let me just further add that I did not see any tactical utility to Bagram.
General McKenzie, isn't it true that the President rejected your best military opinion and advice as to how quickly to withdraw American troops from Afghanistan?
Well, I will say this. It has been my view that that I recommended a level of 2,500, a level that would have allowed us to hold Bagram and other airfields as well. Once you go below that level and make a decision to go to 0, it is no longer feasible to hold Bagram.
But that was your best opinion and advice.
That remains my view now as it was then.
Thank you. And you said to hold Bagram would have taken 2,500. A minute ago, you said 5,000. It sounds like it was 2,500.
Well, it depends on the situation. If you're talking about a situation where you're not fighting the Taliban and you have the full assistance of the Afghan government, or the Taliban's attacks against you at a minimum, yes, you can hold it at 2,500. If, however, you posit that you're in Afghanistan, say beyond August the 31st, without the tacit agreement of the Taliban and without the assistance of the government of Afghanistan, who provided most of the physical security at Bagram, then you have to put a big footprint in, just as we did at HKI. It's exactly the same. The two situations are analogous.
Gentleman's time has expired. Mr. Garamendi.
Gentlemen, thank you so very much for your testimony. Before I go any further, I want to acknowledge an extraordinary effort and successful effort made by the U.S. military, particularly the Air Force, in the most awesome and successful evacuation of civilians ever in the history of this world. Well done. Very, very well done, and compliments to all involved in that. Obviously, the loss of the 13 members of the military was a great tragedy, and you and all of us regret that. The fog of war is only repeated by the fog of the committee. So let me lay out some time frames here. In mid-2018, former President Trump ordered formal and direct U.S. Taliban negotiations without the Afghan government participating. In February 2020, August 2019, President Trump said that he would withdraw all U.S. troops as quickly as possible. In February 2020, the United States and the Taliban signed a formal agreement in which the United States committed to withdraw all of its troops, contractors, and non-diplomatic civilian personnel from Afghanistan no later than May 1st, 2021. In June 2020, the U.S. troop levels reached 8,600. In October, former President Trump tweeted, "We should have the small number of remaining brave men and women serving in Afghanistan home by Christmas." In November 17, 2020, then Acting Secretary of Defense Miller announced that we will implement former President Trump's orders to continue repositioning forces from Afghanistan, and that 2,500 U.S. troops will remain there by January 15th. On January 15th, he announced that there were indeed 2,500 troops left. On January 20th, Biden became president. 2,500 troops were then in Afghanistan. On April 14th, President Biden announced his intention to continue the withdrawal, all regular U.S. troops, by September 11th, 4 months after the pre-planned May 1st deadline. On July 2nd, Italy and Germany withdrew their troops. On July 17th, we have had specific testimony here on what then happened from July 17th on. And if I recall correctly, the Afghan government completely collapsed on the 20th of August. Wasn't there any longer, and from there, the evacuations commenced. General McKenzie, with the 2,500 troops on the ground, sufficient, as agreed with the Taliban,